Let's give you some perspective on the issue of media freedom around the world. Let's bring in William Bird, who is a leading voice, you know him, and also a media policy and on issues of media policy and press freedom. William, good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Sobering words coming through there from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Just your perspective of what's really at play. The sense that I'm getting, William, is that you're dealing with a situation where old challenges such as journalists dying in conflicts and war zones meet new challenges in the form of AI. But let me hear from you, your reading of the state of media freedom as we mark this day today.
Good afternoon. Well, I guess it's a bit of a mixed picture, because if you look at the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index, South Africa has actually moved up a number of places in that regard. So that's some really good news that we do have for South Africa. I think we're now number one on the continent again, with Namibia very, very close behind us. So there are some beacons of light. But I think what is clear is that the profession of journalism has never faced quite as many challenges, and they're not the kind of traditional ones. You've got some which are the clear sustainability issues. We know the SABC is struggling financially. Government for decades has dithered around these issues instead of trying to find a stability and bring sustainability to the SABC. We haven't had a policy update in over 2 decades. We see journalists now routinely undermined and attacked, their credibility demeaned. We're seeing that these things are coming from some of the most powerful people in the world. You've got the Trump regime and their acolytes spreading clear instances of mis and disinformation about the media and their role, what they do, and then you see them being harassed on an individual level, certainly, and that's a very gendered kind of an issue. And at the same time, you're seeing those things, many of them translating into real-world actions where journalists are being harassed and threatened. We've seen some journalists being arrested in Kenya just a few hours ago today. So these things are crisis points for any country that wants to have access to information that we can trust and rely on.
But interestingly, of all of those themes that you just fleshed out there, William, UNESCO, who lead the commemorations of this day, have chosen the theme for 2025 to be Reporting in the Brave New World, the Impact of Artificial Intelligence on Press Freedom and the Media. Why is this an important theme, and how does it find expression in countries such as South Africa?
So, in fact, some of these issues we will be unpacking at a big conference next week in Johannesburg on the 7th and 8th of May with UNESCO, looking at the impact of AI. And AI, we know, is one of those significant developments in technology, and that means it's going to impact every single area, and that means it's going to impact the field of journalism. It's already impacting it in terms of being able to spread mis and disinformation, but it's also impacting it in good ways. The issue is with any new technology, what we saw with social media, for example, was social media burst on the scene and everyone was so wowed by this thing, and there was more and more efforts to say, we don't need to regulate, we don't need to do things, we need to let it run. And we saw that when you don't do something deliberately, in other words, if you don't deliberately say we need to ensure that this is in line with international law and human rights principles, we've seen that what social media has effectively allowed is systemic attacks and undermining of journalists. It allows systemic misogyny, it allows hate speech and incitement. Those are the things that get traction, those are the things that are actively rewarded and monetized on many of these social media platforms. So these aren't good things to do. Now, AI is effectively the next step in that revolution, and this time, instead of saying, well, AI is brilliant, it's here, let's just see what happens kind of thing, people are saying, no, we've had too many recent experiences of this. We need to make sure that we use AI in a way that doesn't just drive for profit at any cost, and in a way that actually serves to reinforce credible information and serves to reinforce and sustain basic and fundamental human rights and our common humanity. And those things are key themes. And so in relation to South Africa and our continent, the Special Rapporteur has recently, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has passed 3 resolutions recently that are deliberately working to deal with all of these issues. And AI is one of the core fundamental issues that runs through all of them. So it's a bit like a framework now that we're going to have to deal with and think about. It's another tool that could potentially do some really good things, but it also can be used for particularly evil and bad things.
So speaking of technology and its impact on journalism and regulation, the sort of innovative regulation that doesn't stifle, one of the other conversations that are coming up increasingly now has to do with the space of podcasts and podcasting, which, you know, many people would agree that it has democratized and given a voice to many, many people to find expression, that freedom of expression. But some are starting to wonder, to what extent do you need to start introducing innovative but not stifling regulation? What's your thinking around that as it relates to, you know, freedom of the media, freedom of expression?
So, I mean, podcasts effectively are like any other form of content on the internet. Some of them have video, others are just purely audio, but they are streamed on the internet. So when you say, how do we regulate that? You're saying the same thing about how do you regulate the internet? And you can to varying degrees, which is that most of the rights that exist offline exist online. In other words, if I defame someone, I go into a room where you are sitting and I say, hey, Tulis is a liar and a deviant and he steals money, you can then take me and sue me for defamation in a court of law. And if I say things that incite violence against you or hate speech, for example, then you can have an action against me if I do that in a room with you or in a crowded hall. It's the same thing that occurs online. Those things are there. The challenge, of course, with many of these things is that you've got anonymity very often that impacts that. It's very hard to chase and identify people that are spreading bad things. And when you get to podcasts, people have millions of subscribers in many instances, and some of them, try and portray themselves as offering credible, reliable information. And that's really the key distinction here. When you say, what can we do about credible, reliable, accurate information? What you're wanting to do is say, those media that subscribe to accepted standards of and international norms of ethical and professional journalism, those are the things that we can and do self-regulate and co-regulate. So you on SABC, you can't just say whatever you like, because you can be taken to the BCCSA, or because it's the SABC, you can also be taken to the Press Council at the same time. Now, some of these podcasters, that becomes a challenge. So what people have to do is, if they are defamed, they can have the same action against those people. It's a long, tedious, and costly experience, but it means that if they're wanting to take some other kind of form of action, unless they belong to the Press Council, people are really going to struggle. And that's one of the big issues that people are dealing with all over the world. Isn't so much the content that is clearly illegal or harmful, or something like hate speech. Hate speech where it's clear, or incitement where it's clear, is a lot easier to deal with than speech that is difficult, or where we aren't really sure if it is hate speech, if it is incitement, or if it's just mean, nasty, and horrible speech. And part of these things is about saying, when you have freedom of expression, you need to make sure that that bar for that is as high as possible. Not because you particularly like that, but because you want to make sure that if you have something to say that people don't like, you have the right to say that and express that, even if it's offensive, even if people don't agree with you. These things are all on a sliding scale, and I guess where we are at now is trying to work out ways of saying speech fits into these kinds of categories. We need to, and we can find actions against them. So if, for example, they are using and spreading racism and incitement, for example, in their podcast, you can lodge a complaint with the South African Human Rights Commission, or if it's misogyny, for example, you can probably take a complaint equally to the Commission on Gender Equality.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, William, is it even possible in that space to talk about the equivalent of what the Press Council does, for example, what the BCCSA does, in that you say to people, be at large, express yourself freely, but know that there are rights that you are balancing, that you're counterbalancing, that you have to respect. And when you do fail and fall beneath a particular standard, is that something that's possible? And two, is it desirable, possibly involving the platform providers to say you have to sign up, to say those that you give a platform to and a voice have to sign up to that balance that says be at large, express yourself, but know that you are counterbalancing against other people's rights as well?
I mean, ideally, you want them to have respect and afford dignity to all, but the world isn't necessarily like that, because otherwise, effectively, Donald Trump wouldn't be allowed to say most of the things that he does, neither nor Elon Musk, for example, and these are two of the most powerful men in the world. What you do want to do, however, is encourage people to seek out credible, reliable, accurate sources of information, credible, reliable, accurate journalism. This is why the SABC and public broadcasters globally are so critical in an environment where there's more and more things that you can't trust because they're just made up, or where people are spreading content that's just so awful. The difference is that if you don't like something someone's saying on a podcast, don't watch it, don't subscribe to it. Let people know. You can go out and say, hey, don't subscribe to this person, they're evil. What you can do for those that are wanting to have a level of credibility, there's nothing stopping any of those podcasters right now from going and signing up to the Press Council. They can do that today. Press Council will say, sure, as long as you agree to abide by these principles, you can be a member and you'll fall under our jurisdiction, and it opens up that complaints procedure.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean we're going to get everyone in there. And yet there is, I agree with you completely, a critical role for platforms. One of the reasons we're in this position is because the platforms have behaved so abominably, particularly a platform like X, for example, where they used to have systems to deal with these things. Elon Musk took over the entire trust team. There's not a single person for the entire continent of Africa dealing with any of the litany of complaints against that platform. So when you get a platform that comes in and says, well, we're going to operate with no backup, no support, no systems, that's a very real problem. And that's something that we have to find bigger and more structured ways of dealing with, not just the issue of podcasters on that platform, but how we make sure that the platforms themselves that give those podcasts, if they're on their subscription, that give them a particular responsibility. So if they are available on any of the Google or the iTunes download platforms, there are community guidelines. They must abide by them. If they don't, they can do the 3 strikes rule and they're off. But there, at least you're starting to get some system where the platform can say, if there's a problem with this, you can report it here, we'll look into it, and we can then act on that basis.
So in recent years, William, if we bring it back to almost the core of our conversation, in recent years it has felt to me that part of the major pressures that the media faces in South Africa are structural. They have to do with the economics of particularly news production and dissemination. To what extent have we overcome that conversation that in a way, found even greater expression in the years immediately after the core and the height of the pandemic, but also finds expression in pressures, I would imagine, around, for instance, broadcasters feeling that they need to emulate what people do on podcasts, social media, and the likes, as well as newspapers increasingly going digital and wondering what their business model looks like going forward.
So I think there's no doubt that in South Africa, and indeed most likely our continent, the biggest threat isn't AI. The biggest threat to media freedom are issues of sustainability, financial sustainability. We're facing extinction level events for many of our news media in South Africa. That's as blunt as you can be about it, and that's the horror that we are facing. The SABC is really, really struggling. Most broadcasters are really struggling. Many of our key news organizations, the private ones, are struggling. Most of our community media have been struggling for over a decade. There's a point at which they go beyond struggling to no longer being able to function, and they cease to exist. If and when that happens, as it will with many of them, you then face a problem of saying, well, where are we going to get our reliable, accurate, credible information from? And when you no longer know who and what you can trust, and no longer have diverse and pluralistic media that you can go to access the information you want, then you no longer have a democratic state. And that's the biggest threat to our media in South Africa. There's no doubt about that. So that's why the Competition Commission's inquiry into the digital media platforms is such a critical inquiry. It's why they're saying, Google, you've been making money. You've made your billions. Every year you make several billion rand off the South African markets. We don't see where the tax goes. We also you've been making much of your money off the backs of journalists, and you need to pay up now, So there's some of those models about sustainability, but the reality is that digital just doesn't pay anywhere near the figures that you need. So we have to look at ways of saying, if we understand that news and information is essential as a public good, as your earlier speaker said, we have to say, well, how do we sustain that in a democracy? Because it's like saying you need roads, public hospitals, running water, and power. Having credible, accurate, reliable information is as important as any of those things. If you don't have it, you don't have a democracy.
Yeah. And your reading of the state of public broadcasting, you alluded to it a little bit. In the United States, we are seeing Donald Trump recently had this executive order basically instructing the non-governmental organization that's responsible for funding public broadcasting and saying withhold funding to PBS and NPR, to which we are seeing that pushback. But there are parallels in a way to be drawn with the situation that you've been alluding to in South Africa, the need to finalize the funding model of the SABC. And what have you made of the almost toing and froing, if not dilly-dallying, around the SABC bill?
I mean, on the states, there's no doubt that this is a deliberate effort by the Trump regime to undermine credible journalism, because it's the thing that seeks to poke holes and expose the wrongdoings that they are busy and actively carrying out, much like state capture that we've seen in our own country a short while ago. So their attacks to undermine and discredit media are clear present threats to any hopes of a democracy in America, and they must be called out for that, and that's what they are. They're blatant attempts to undermine and destroy democracy in the United States. In South Africa, the efforts have been to try and control the SABC. One of the ways that you control it is, of course, you keep it in a state of crisis, and it's in a state of crisis that you can do things in the dark and hope nobody sees. It's precisely what happened under Hlaudi Motsoeneng. Now, fortunately, for the first time in many, many, many decades, we've actually got a minister that is seeking to challenge Parliament on things. He openly said this bill shouldn't be here, and he withdrew the bill. Then you have Parliament saying, no, it's a good bill. I mean, there's not a single basis on which that bill could possibly be called good. It's horrific. It's awful. It's just 20 years out of date. What we do need urgently is a new funding model for the SABC. We need government to have done the research on this more than a decade ago, because they've known about this for the last 15 years. It's not as though this is a new thing. They need to do that urgently, and we need new broadcasting policy. If we don't do these things, all we're going to do is keep SABC limping. And the more you do that, the more you undermine its ability to produce diverse programming to meet the needs of audiences, the more you undermine its credibility. The more you undermine its credibility, the fewer people that watch it. The fewer people that watch it, the less sustainable it becomes, and you're into a vicious death cycle. And that's close to where we are at the moment with our public broadcaster. But to be clear, if you want to have a sustainable democracy and where you have and respect freedom of expression, you have to have something like a public broadcaster. If you look at the highest ranked countries in the World Press Freedom Index, you'll see that they all have very strong, publicly supported, funded public broadcasters and diverse and pluralistic media systems. And that's where we need to be getting. We've got a lot that we can be immensely proud of. The SABC functions independently. We just need to make sure it can do that and do an even better job than it is able to currently.
As a parting shot then, William, could I get your reflections on the conduct of journalists and media as institutions that wield power in society, in a way harking back to what the Constitutional Court, the admonition of the Constitutional Court in that Khumalo judgment that talked about the need for journalists and the media to exercise their roles and responsibilities scrupulously, And if they fail to do that, the project of democracy, constitutional democracy, would be greatly imperiled. In 2025, where do we find ourselves? That bridge of trust between journalists as institutions that wield a great deal of power and society and how they view the media?
Well, when you've got clear and deliberate efforts to undermine their credibility, it means that you just need one journalist to do something stupid. They make a mistake, they exercise poor judgment, they interview a mother whose child has been raped, and they think that that's okay. These things have profound negative impacts, not just on the trust and credibility of that journalist and that news organization, but of media as a general rule. So, of course, you then also find that with fewer journalists, they are less able to do the kind of research that they need to. It means they're less likely to challenge a politician when they come out and say something that's a blatant lie, for example. It means that they're less likely to be able to go and do stories in communities where you have to go and understand them and find out what's really going on before you just do it. Otherwise, you're likely to get a story where 20 people get killed on a weekend, for example, and you don't really understand why. So, and what that does for ordinary people is they look at this and they go, well, this doesn't make any sense. What on earth is going on here? So they're in a double bind, really, where you need more journalists now more than ever, but at the same time, they've got less resources. So it means that the ones that are there, their commitment to their craft, to professionalism, to ethics, they have to operate at a level that is like a Formula One driver driving around a racetrack at 300 kilometers an hour. They make one mistake and it can be fatal for their news organization.
Yeah. All right, William, I've got to let you go at this point. I could hear that your dogs were getting a bit restless there in the background. Thank you for this conversation and for indulging me. That is William Bird. He's a leading voice, of course, on issues of media policy as well as press freedom in our country.